Today we will be discussing habitat management with the private lands biologist from Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. This episode will focus on wildlife habitat definitions and what they mean for a land manager.
So what is habitat? It's where animals live. It's what they need to live. It's food, water, and cover. Essentially, those items arranged in a usable space is what we define as wildlife habitat.
Life history strategy is an adaptive strategy of how an animal allocates resources throughout its lifetime for survival and reproduction. Different species have different strategies for how they allocate these resources. A classic example of this would be the tortoise and the hare, where one is going to essentially live fast and die young, and another one will live a long time. Interestingly enough, these two species occupy the same habitat types. However, they use the resources completely differently. Limiting factors are the parameters which can affect population growth. These factors can either be dependent or independent. Dependent factors, such as resources, predation, and parasites and disease, are dependent on population density. On the other hand, independent factors do not depend on population density. These can include weather and human disturbance.
Plant succession is simply the orderly change in plant communities over time. We have some initial plants that colonize the site that are generally going to be annuals, followed by a succession into perennial grasses, and have woody saplings coming into the site. Over time, those initial colonizing trees will grow into large saplings and young trees, and eventually in the deep south we would have a climax and a mixed pine or an oak hickory type forest. There are some species of wildlife, like bobwhite for instance, that tend to do better in the earlier stages of plant succession, whereas we have some species like white-tailed deer or wild turkey that can use a variety of successional stages during different times in their life history. When we talk about plant composition, we're specifically talking about the actual species of plants that are there. Regardless of whether we're talking about a field or a forest, it's going to be the species of plants that are present, and that can be determined by our habitat management. Structure, and particularly vertical structure. There's an understory with different plants than we have in the shrub level or the midstory, and then of course an overstory that has totally different plants as well. Another important component is plant species diversity. And diversity doesn't just include the number of plants, but also how well distributed those plants are throughout the patch that we're trying to manage. And lastly, we talk about arrangement. So all the different habitat types or cover types that we have available to us, we'd like for those to be arranged in such a way that it benefits the animal we're trying to manage best that it can.
For more wildlife management guidance, go to our webpage at mdwfp.com and click on the Private Lands Program link to request a site visit with a wildlife biologist.